Hello and welcome. We're going to go ahead and get started right on time. So welcome to Teaching Online with Zoom Classroom Management. In this session, we're going to talk about classroom management and how to handle classroom management through Zoom and what the differences are between classroom management in the classroom versus in Zoom. To keep this within the 45-minute range, your microphones have all been muted, and we encourage any questions that you may have to just go ahead and put it in the chat. We do have a moderator that will stand by that will ask me questions at appropriate times. And at the end of the session, if we still have time, we'll unmute everybody's microphone and go through, answer any questions. So welcome, and we will go ahead and get started. So my name is Christina Churchill. Just a little bit about me so you know my background. I am the Academic Technology Services Director for the School of Business. I have a PhD in Learning Technologies. I have about 12 years experience teaching face-to-face and online students from K-12 all the way to graduate students. And not only that, one thing that makes me a little bit unique is I have 5 years of experience being an online student. So hopefully it'll give you different perspective on things from the teaching side and from the student side. So I do want to start with, what is classroom management? What does that really mean? Because that word kind of is thrown around a lot. And what we're going to focus on is kind of this definition. It's a variety of skills and techniques that teachers use to keep students organized, orderly, focused, attentive, on task, and really in the end, be academically productive in class. So they get what they should be getting out of your class. So what are the tips? What are the different things that need to be considered in Zoom and in face-to-face? So when we think classroom management before COVID, some of the things, and different people or different teachers have different opinions, and that's okay, but some allowed no computers or no devices or no phones. That was something that was kind of a standard, and again, nothing against it, but that's how they handled some of the keeping the students on task. Others incorporated asking questions to make sure that they stayed focused with the topic. Kind of a procedure people established is maybe raising their hand, or maybe not. Maybe it was just an environment where people just kind of shouted out the question as they came up. I've also heard of some people that would prepare either their PowerPoints with the notes printed out on the side, or packets of material that you would go through. And students would stay engaged by filling that out during class. And also sharing new ideas, having kind of a discussion-based classrooms. And of course, respecting others and really setting the expectation for students to be attentive in class. And also, classroom management included an end of the class procedure. Did students 5 minutes before class just pick up and walk out? Or were there certain closing statements that you made as a teacher that then allowed students to know, okay, we're at the end of class, and people would walk out. So all of these are kind of components that pre-COVID, and I'm sure everyone else had some others that were established in the classroom. So how does all of this translate in the Zoom world? Because now they're not physically there, and it makes a little bit more of a disconnect. And how can we pull that together to make sure that your students are learning what they should be learning and engaged in your classroom? So I think the first steps, and this is similar to if you had your class 100% face-to-face, the first step is really steps. One is setting procedures. What are the procedures? So obviously, setting the procedures and making sure they're defined in your syllabus, make sure that things are clear for all of your students. They know how it is appropriate to behave. So One of the things is how do the students communicate with you? So in a class, let's say that you established a procedure in your face-to-face class where you had a pausing point at a certain part in your PowerPoint where you opened it up for questions. And this is also how do they communicate, out of class, but what are the set procedures that you want? Because every teacher is kind of different, right? Everybody teaches in a method and allows the students to communicate in a different method. So make sure you set those procedures. How do your students ask questions? So in Zoom, again, how are they supposed to ask questions? One of the things we found is just a little bit of a disconnect where students didn't know, wait, am I supposed to put this in the chat? Or am I supposed to just ask the question? Or wait, should I email them the question? How do I handle that? And it's not natural for students to know. And just like you established in your face-to-face class, the proper method to have students ask questions, make sure you set that up ahead of time. Also for accountability. So let's say that you're thinking they're just going to ask the questions out loud, but instead they're typing a lot of questions in the chat and they're getting frustrated because you're not answering the questions that were typed in the chat. So just set those procedures so the students know what they should do. Also set procedures on how do students participate in class activities. So what will be the method that they're going to participate? Is this a discussion in a group setting? Will you have breakout rooms? Will you have just establish those procedures so the students know ahead of time? Then also set expectations. And this, again, I would recommend define this in your syllabus, define this in Canvas so there's no questions. What are your attendance expectations? Do you expect, if your class is very much discussion-based, make sure you let them know, hey, the class is discussion-based. It is imperative for you to show up for class. So make sure that that is clearly defined so the students know. And this webcam off and on, I know this has been a big debate. And I have to tell you, I feel more connected when everybody has their camera on and I can see them and engage with them as somebody that's teaching. Something to consider also is studies seem to show that when students are allowed to have cameras off, it allows for more or less Zoom fatigue. So just kind of keep that in mind. Again, I like the webcams on, it helps me connect, and I think that's something to be encouraged, but something to keep in the back of your mind is it does cause more fatigue for students to have their webcams on, and we'll get into details on that. Microphones off and on if you're expecting students to have discussions, or maybe, like for this session, we're turning microphones off during the presentation, but then on at the end. So kind of establish and set the expectations of how you're going to run your class. This is kind of interesting. So appropriate dress and location. So again, setting your expectations. I know I've heard from some faculty, well, they're sitting in their pajamas in bed, and that's so inappropriate. And I totally get it. But set this up in your syllabus. Let the expectations be, hey, please be appropriately dressed. We're going to have discussions. It's a distraction. And I can tell you as a student, if you see somebody sitting in their bed in their pajamas, that's very distracting for other students. So make sure that you define what you want in your class, what is professional, just like they normally would not show up in pajamas in your classroom face to face. Let them know this is what I'm expecting. And again, discuss these expectations, put it in the syllabus, but also, especially your first day of class, go through all of those expectations. So there's no guessing. If you are holding a class with discussions, and I'll go through some kind of tips of what different people have used. if discussion is an expectation, make sure that you define that. Make sure that you say, okay, well, X amount of your grade is discussion based, and you need to be participating in discussion during Zoom. Or so again, set those expectations, and I'll give you some tips on how to help with that as well, because I know sometimes we try to do discussions and nobody says anything. And again, interaction with students, what are the expectations? Also, letting the students know what you're expecting to be prepared for class. And if you want them to watch a video, if you need them to read something, if you have that expectation clearly set in multiple ways, and have them be accountable to be prepared in class. Because if they're not prepared for class, then your class is just not going to be as productive. The other thing, and again, these are just first steps, is establish the class norms. So if you put out all these expectations in your syllabus, but you never really talk about them in class, you never really reinforce them in class, you just kind of put them out there and you veer off to letting, let's say you said, my expectations is everybody can have their has to have their camera on, and then you never talk about it in class and no one turns their camera on. Well, okay, all your expectations just went out the window because you didn't establish the norm. So make sure, remind the students of what the expectations are. Praise the students. I hate using the word praise, but praise or acknowledge the students that are following the expectations, so other students can follow. So other students can say, oh, well, I didn't know, I forgot I had to have my camera on. Everybody's different, And, appropriately address students that are not meeting the expectations. And I would say that, obviously, in an appropriate method, but let students know that, hey, I really need you to participate in discussion, or really your location is very distracting. Laying in bed is very distracting for other students to see you on camera. So whatever, address those. And my recommendation would be address them right away, right? The second, don't, oh, well, they did it one time, that, just continue and be really consistent to set that class norm of what is acceptable and what is not. Because if it's not addressed, and, let's give the example of pajamas, and 2 students are in their pajamas and it's not addressed, now all of a sudden you have 5 people in their pajamas, and so forth. So set that class norm as what you expect. So kind of going back to how does this all, translate into Zoom? So let's talk a little bit about classroom management and that definition. The first part was students, helping students be organized. So my recommendation is provide material before class through Canvas. So if you in the past were giving them your PowerPoints and they were able to write on your PowerPoint, or they had a packet that they had to fill out, or whatever material, provide that material through Canvas. Help them stay organized and prepared for your class. Ensure that all your due dates are available in class, but this is beyond just assignment due dates. So if you're wanting them to read a specific thing, or watch a specific thing, or do a specific task that may even not be oriented towards a grade, make sure that those dates are really clearly defined in your Canvas course. This will help them be prepared for when they come to class. And, organize your Canvas course. If your students, think about, students have a lot of professors, right? And everybody has a different organizational method. But I look at it as, if your organizational method, if they're spending more time trying to figure out where your content is or what things are, or rather than spending time on your actual subject that you're trying to teach, that's where we have an organization problem, right? So you want them to spend the maximum amount of time on the content or the course, the material that you're teaching, rather than trying to figure out your method of organization. So help the students stay organized by organizing your course so it's a lot easier for them to find things and material. And over communicate. So, and with a variety of methods. Now, I'm a big proponent for using announcements in Canvas, because it gives you a way, as a student, I can always go back to the announcement. I know some professors just email their students, but if I was your student, you saw my email, I have so many emails flooding. And when I'm looking for that one email that you sent, and I don't know where in the world it is, but if you posted it in announcements, it sends me an email, and it's always in announcements. And I know for that class, if I'm looking for that specific piece of information, I know for a fact I can go to announcements and find it. So, over communicate what the expectations are, and staying organized. So moving to orderly. So establish an order of your class, right? And this, I kind of have a mixed feeling on this. I think it's good to establish, okay, well, I always start my class with a lecture, and then after 5 minutes or 10 minutes, I'm going to do breakout rooms. And then after that, we're going to come back and discuss everything that was in the breakout rooms. And then, but you don't want to be so predictable that they know, okay, I can check out for the first 15 minutes of class, and then I'm going to be in the breakout room, so I have to pay attention. And so be a little bit unpredictable, but at the same time have some sort of order in class. It helps the students kind of know what is coming as far as being prepared. The other thing is establish expectations for breakout rooms. And I do have a session, I believe later on today or tomorrow, on breakout rooms and doing these breakout rooms, but do establish what the expectations are, because I've been in many breakout rooms where, okay, I've never met these people, and you're like, okay, what are we supposed to do? Oh, hi, nice to meet you. And it's kind of this awkward, like, set the expectations. One of the things that I found is not necessarily you assigning a leader, but saying, okay, well, we're going to do breakout rooms, and I want you to discuss this topic. And within that topic, I'd like for you to assign a leader that's going to discuss these 5 questions. I want you guys to discuss these 5 questions, and the leader's going to present a summary report of what your findings were, or whatever. But set those expectations so the breakout rooms are effective, and they're just not like awkwardly just sitting in a room trying to get to know each other, but they're really focused. And also establish a method to ask questions. So again, we talked about, well, if I'm expecting students to just put the questions out there verbally, and I never check the chat, and as a student, I'm typing all sorts of questions in the chat, and you never even look at it until the end, that causes kind of some disconnects. So make sure you establish, how do they communicate? How do students communicate and ask questions with you? And what's the best way? One of the things that I would also say, kind of on the same line, is keep in mind your shy, quiet students. So, the verbal questioning out loud, just asking questions, is great because it feels like students are engaged and there may be a discussion and so forth. But there may be the really shy person that will never unmute their mic, and just kind of keep that in consideration. I look at chat sometimes as a way to connect students that would never connect in the classroom, because they are the quiet ones. But they feel okay in typing the questions in there. So as you establish how they're going to ask questions to you, just make sure that you kind of consider all personalities and all, another thing on asking questions is students need to feel comfortable in asking questions to you, and you may get a group of students that are not as comfortable, and staying or showing up to class a few minutes early and connecting. If you're 100% online, let's say, it's easy to connect early or stay late and kind of establish that comfort for those online students. Obviously, that's a challenge if you're doing the SMU Flex because of time constraints, but just kind of things to consider. Focus and attentive. So have opportunities for students to discuss. You know, it's really hard, and we'll talk a little bit about Zoom fatigue, but it's really hard to stay connected. And I'm like, okay, it's already 20 minutes and hopefully I didn't lose everybody, but it's hard to have somebody have to listen to you for an hour, 50 minutes, you know, just nonstop, always connecting. Having that opportunity for students to discuss, okay, maybe talk about a specific topic and take a couple minutes to discuss questions, or maybe pose a question out there and see, because the more interactive they are, even though they may not be the experts in the field like you are, it gives them an opportunity to process the information that you presented. So give opportunities for students to discuss. If you like to have a discussion-based class and you feel like you pose questions out there and nobody answers, a method that you could use is really assigning and rotating these responsibilities to carry the discussion. So for example, if I'm teaching a discussion-based class, and let's say I have 30 students in the class, I divide up, okay, I have so many classes, I'm going to give these 4 students, each week I'm going to assign 4 students to the responsibility to carry the discussion. So I'll still present and do my lecture, and then now I want to do discussion and I want them to carry the discussion. And that will avoid this silence, you know, oh, does anyone want to talk about this? Or do you have any questions? And nobody answers, and you just wonder if you've just been talking to the screen for 20 minutes. But this will help and give responsibilities. And will also hold them accountable in the sense that if there were material to prep for, if there was things that they had, these students will make sure, obviously, if you have a grade associated with it oftentimes, but they'll make sure to carry that conversation if it is assigned and if there's accountability to it. Again, we talked about providing material for students to follow. A lot of students like that connection. Here's my PowerPoint, take notes next to it. Providing this in a PDF format or in PowerPoint, just in Canvas, so they can print it out if that's the way they like to learn and take notes, and it helps them follow. Use tools such as Poll Everywhere. So Poll Everywhere, and Zoom also has a very simple tool, but it allows student interaction. So Poll Everywhere is a polling tool, and I can pose a question, and my students can answer the question on their phone or on their computer. So use tools like that to for student interaction. And then mute distractions. So obviously you have the ability to mute all your students. And this muting distractions can go back to setting expectations, right? So if, let's say that a distraction would be, for example, for me as a student, if another student had their dog right there next to them and was like, or their cat roaming around everywhere, you know, those are distractions. You need to try to minimize those distractions. Again, that goes back to setting those expectations for your students and trying to keep all of the students more attentive by eliminating as many distractions as possible. And again, even though I said before, be predictable as far as set a process for your class, but also be unpredictable and hold students accountable. If they know the first 15 minutes of class, you're going to lecture and I'm 10 minutes late, I'm like, oh, that's fine. I'm late, but she likes her lectures for the first 15 minutes, so she's not going to call on me. Or, do things that are a little bit unpredictable to hold the students accountable, to make sure that they're attentive. And maybe it's, okay, I'm gonna start class with poll everywhere, and we're gonna discuss this, but first I want to get their opinion, and then that way, right away, the students, oh, they have to be online because I give a participation grade, and part of the participation grade is you need to make sure you fill out the poll everywhere, or whatever it may be, but just hold the students accountable. So give opportunities to make sure that students are on tasks. So some of the opportunities is, discussions, as we talked about, polls, using breakout rooms. And another thing that I like is, okay, you talk about something and you pose a question, and now, okay, ask a student, okay, and everybody has to write the answer, let's say in Word. They have to type out what their feeling is, or what their answer according to what they think. And then at this point, you can say, okay, Sally, go ahead and share your screen, and let's talk about your answer. So really have that interaction. Now, obviously, it works best if you let them know that this is what you're going to do. But those are just some options or opportunities to ensure that the students stay on task. Another thing is, think about your content. Think about if there are certain topics that are really heavy in material, that are really difficult, maybe even difficult to understand. So let's say that you're teaching a physics concept, and you know that every time that concept, like, students struggle understanding it. I would consider creating asynchronous material, which would be a recording of it. So again, a small recording of just that concept, but by lightening the material that you're presenting in the classroom and moving the really difficult, technical, hard to comprehend maybe material to asynchronous, it really helps your student, because it allows them to go back and watch it a million times. So think about this. Let's say that you teach a concept in physics, and typically in a pre-COVID world, you would teach that concept once. And if the student got it, they got it. And if they didn't, they'd have to figure it out. They'd have to go to their friends. They would have to go online on YouTube, or whatever method to figure out exactly how to solve that problem that you did. But now in this world we're in, we have the ability to create this material, and maybe it's a 10-minute recording of this really difficult concept that if I don't get it as a student, I can watch it 20 times. I can, wait, what did he do there? How did we, and it gives the opportunity to really have the student have a greater concept, a greater opportunity to succeed, because they can watch it over and over, and it meets that demand. So think about your topic that you're teaching, and what material, what things are really hard that your students never get that you could record and move that. And maybe class time, you typically taught that, maybe you review that and discuss it and process it, but then refocus students on, there's asynchronous material here, go back, watch it again, and make sure you have this mastered. So let's talk a little bit about Zoom fatigue, because Zoom fatigue, if you Google Zoom fatigue, it is real, and there are challenges, and I'm sure you all have felt it as well, but our students do too. So make sure you build in breaks. And I know there's, you may not have the opportunity, if your class is short, maybe 50 minutes, that maybe you don't have time for a break, and I completely understand. Some of the graduate classes, I know at Cox, for example, we have 3-hour classes, and I can't imagine sitting in front of the screen for 3 hours. You have to build in breaks. And I would also challenge to build in breaks where no one is chatting during the break. Like, okay, we are doing a break, and everybody is going to turn off their camera and mute themselves and go run around their house. I don't know, whatever it may be, but really get out of it being in front of the computer, in front of the screen, and just stretch and not go check your email, but get away from the computer itself. Limit background distractions. So studies have shown that our brain is processing a lot of information, right? So you have your PowerPoint that you're looking at, but your students are also looking at all their other, all the students online, and wait, is that a dog? Wait, I'm looking at that book. What's that book on her shelf? Or whatever it may be. All of this is an overload of processing for our brain. So really trying to limit background distractions. What I've read recently is using plain backgrounds is better than using things that are cluttered. Our brain is on overload, and especially spending a lot of time in front of the computer and with all these other distractions, it causes us to have this fatigue. Another thing, and I know that this is going to be challenging for you to manage, but recommend to students to not multitask. So you're sitting there watching my video, watching my webinar, and over here, oh wait, I can check my email real quick. I'll still listen to her, but I'm checking my email, or whatever it may be. Our brains can't do all of these things. What would happen is I'm really focused on my email, and then okay, now I'm back on listening to the lesson, and we're not able to comprehend, we're not able to grasp the information like we would if we were 100% focused. So really do recommend to your students to try to minimize anything else that they're doing when they're in class. I know that's a challenge, but research does show that we just can't process all this information. And again, as we discussed, explore using asynchronous material, especially for the content that's really hard. It's really hard to comprehend. A note on the asynchronous material, though, is I would recommend not doing anything over 9 minutes. So your material should be chunked, right? And so the best way would be by topic, short. So that's kind of side note. I know that they're doing some sessions on creating asynchronous material, but as far as our brains and how we process, the really 9-minute mark is really the most that our brain can take as far as getting all this new material in our mind. So some technical considerations. So what they found is if you move your camera eye level. So I know that if you have a laptop, you'll be looking down just because of the position of the camera, right? If you have, and I didn't get a chance to adjust it exactly, but by looking more at the camera, your students have more of a connection with me. Make sure that you're not showing your forehead or your chin, or that you're framed really well, but that you're really looking at it, because they found that students have more of a connection if you are looking at them or have that perceived idea that you are looking at them. Also watch for cues on your students. So if you say, okay, well, I want everybody to turn their webcams on, but do be attentive. I know it's difficult, but be attentive on what's going on with your students. It is more difficult to see if they're completely lost compared to if, they're just sitting in the classroom and you're talking and you're like, okay, no one has any idea what I'm talking about. That's easier to figure that out, but do try to be attentive on the webcams. Zoom now, if you're not aware, you can do a split screen on your Zoom settings, and it will allow you to see your PowerPoint, but all of your Zoom students on the same screen, even if you don't have dual screen. So keep that in mind. Again, if you're in the classroom and you're doing the SMU Flex, you will have the ability, most classrooms have the TV up front that you'll be able to see your students. So watch for those cues and try to connect with your students that way. If you can, I have multiple screens. Multiple screens work really well because on one side, it'll have all my students, on the other is my material. But if that is a possibility, it works really well. Minimize your busy backgrounds. I have a pretty plain background right now, but if you have something that's very distracting, just try to minimize it, even if it's just a plain solid background or one with SMU logo or something. The less distractions for your students, the better. And again, incorporate the breakout room technology. So kind of looking back at classroom management before COVID, and now comparing it to, you know, what I discussed. So obviously no computers or devices, that's not possible because they are on the computers, but maybe trying to guide them and make sure that they're not multitasking, that they're not trying to do other things. Asking questions. So really classroom management is the same. Establish how are they going to ask those questions? How are they going to raise their hand? You know, how are they going to interact with you if they have questions? Paper packets you used to send, maybe now you upload everything and prepare them that way. Let them know, hey, if you need to write, the information's here and you can print it out. Give them the opportunity to share new ideas. In the classroom and in Zoom, it's the same, it's just a different medium. Again, respect others, have them be attentive in class, and establish end of class procedures, just like you would in a classroom. So that's it. So I'm going to open it up, Jennifer. And you know what, if you want to ask some questions, Jennifer, and then I'll just open it up for discussions if people want to ask questions out loud.
Sure. So I think the first kind of discussion question was why do cameras off correlate with like having less Zoom fatigue? Beth asked this question. So is it because cameras off produce less real engagement and more multitasking? And then some other people were saying that, you know, it kind of having their cameras on make them extra aware of what they're doing and how they're presenting themselves. And so maybe a compromise is turning off your self view so that way you don't see it.
Yes, and the self view is something that's come up a lot. So a lot of times people are, you know, when they see the gallery view, they see themselves and they're distracted really by how they look. Oh, wait, my hair is sticking up, or wait, I have to stand up straight, or, you know, whatever it may be, or you're distracted by looking at other people. So again, it goes back to how your brain processes. So although for engagement, like the contact, like I'm connecting with you because I can see you, that is positive, but there's also a drawback because there's, you know, the distraction of, wait, are those the trees? What kind, where was that at SMU? What's that background? You know, so there's that distraction, but it is also the fatigue of having to be a certain way. I think, you know, again, I just saw what the results were. I didn't look at why, but that's what they're saying. So there, it's kind of a mixed. And so, you know, maybe incorporating, okay, let's say that you know, once a month, we're going to have cameras off, like, or once every 2 weeks, everybody turn their camera off. You can sit in your pajamas in bed. I don't care. Everybody, you know, and so maybe it's not something you incorporate every single time, but maybe it's something unique that you incorporate so then they can just like relax and not worry about everything else and really focus on the content. So just a suggestion on that.
How would someone respond if, say, they're doing that share screen activity that you were talking about, where someone, like, everyone writes the answer, then you choose one person to share their screen? How would you respond if someone says they don't want to share their screen?
I think it goes back to expectations. I think that you establish ahead of time, this is how I do class. And part of being part of the discussion is you need to, you know, now obviously if the question was very sensitive, you don't want to do that, right? But if you're, okay, what is, and it's a very generic, what is this? I think you set the expectation. Now, obviously be respectful of people's, what if they don't know the answer? They don't want to be embarrassed of, in front of their, be sensitive to that, obviously, and maybe address it afterwards and move on. Okay, well, Sally, you didn't want to, let's go ask somebody else. And then maybe address with Sally, hey, part of the expectations of this class is we share the information and our thoughts. We want to learn from each other. Are you doing okay? And just kind of address it that way.
Then let's see, we had a comment about the idea of chunked assignments being fast food learning, which I think is kind of funny. So I don't know why, I guess why is chunking assignments or chunking asynchronous learning important?
Well, that's really interesting. Fast food learning. Well, I would say at least it's learning. Because if it wasn't learning, and I totally understand, but this is the thing, like if our brain, scientists have shown that our brain can only take on the first 9 minutes of information, right? So if I'm going to present, if I'm going to record for an hour and throw it out to the students and say, okay, well, here's your lesson, here's your hour recording that you need to watch, versus very chunked, and okay, on this, the first 9 minutes, you can still present an hour of information, but it's chunked by what you need, right? So I need to go look at this concept. I need this concept. Okay, now I'm ready to tackle this. It just helps the brain process information. So again, I would go, okay, it's fast food learning, but it's learning, right? So I would rather do fast food learning than no learning, like a brain dump, and they only get this much out of the content. So we have to really adapt to how our brain works, rather than just, a brain dump of all this information on there. That's what I would say to that. But that was an interesting perspective.
And then could you just really quickly go over how you would hide your self view?
Oh, that's a good question, because I just saw that. Oh, so if you move your cursor where you see the picture of yourself and you see the 3 little dots, if you click on the 3 little dots, there's something that says hide self view. And I think that's new. So that's how you would. And I know I'm distracted by my self view. So, I mean, I think that helps with students. And by the way, one thing that I would recommend is making sure you have downloaded the latest Zoom app. So Zoom has some new features, and the hiding the self view, if you don't see that as an option, you probably have the older Zoom app. But I would recommend to download that. Just Google Zoom or download the latest Zoom app, and you'll find it. It's really easy to install, but that gives you those extra features. So any more questions?
So Tanya, if you, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing that right, if you hide your self view and then you want to get it back, let's see.
Oh, I don't even know how to do that, honestly. Because that is new.
You can click the 3 dots on anyone's image, and then you'll have to show self view.
Uh-huh.
Oh,
Thanks,
okay.
Faye.
Thank you. Awesome. Any more questions?
I think that's it.
Hopefully this was helpful. Yeah, so thank you so much for attending, and the recording of this will be available no later than Monday. So hopefully this was helpful for everyone. Have a great day.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thanks.